Greetings, everybody. This is ARound, a community for decision makers, especially for software startups that are striving towards or have reached their Series A. And then, of course, if you are sufficiently bootstrapped, you're welcome in. We're live streaming this onto to LinkedIn, and then, of course, we're going to go and cut up the clip so anyone can go and watch later on. So in the beginning, what we're going to do is just give a few minutes for everybody to present themselves. It might sound something like this. Your name, role, company, and what you're looking for. So I'm Josh Rosenthal, Community Manager at ARound, and I'm looking for leaders at startups to join ARound to either present or to be involved in what we're going to call a solve session, which is the content coming up in December. To take a second bite of the apple, my specialty is customer success-led growth in order to feed sales-led growth. So it's kind of that partnership. Starts a little bit at marketing and moves on over into sales, and then the customer success-led growth as it's known traditionally. So for me, I'm looking for those ARound companies to get involved. Let me push it on over. We have a couple of our marketers. Just because you joined first, Mr. Sebastian, I'll push it on over to you.
Did I get my microphone working?
I think so.
All right. I'm also technical. Well, I'm Sebastian Holst. My current company is Fool Me Once, focused on effective use of AI in a variety of different contexts. My motive for being here is, as it always has been, to learn from the awesome speakers and the dialogue that follows.
Mr. Philippe, I think you were second.
Not that, but
Volume up.
Philip from Belgium, mostly working around AI, agentic AI, and security-related things. So that's why I look to expand and connecting people, and always looking forward to interesting talks and ideas and inspiring people. So that's why I'm here.
And Ms. Christine.
Hi, Christine Carrig. I'm a head of marketing. I'm here to learn from all the experts who are doing Series A startups. I'm looking to for a startup to help scale and learn from you guys. Thank you.
Then let me go and introduce our speaker this week. So we have Dan Moore, Principal Product Engineer at FusionAuth, and he is talking about the new authentication paradigm for the humans, agents, and everything in between. But first, Mr. Dan, let me have you take 2 bites of the apple. Before we get into our actionable intelligence session, 15-minute presentation, 10-minute discussion with a single takeaway, why don't you introduce yourself? Then we'll pop on over and get you started.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Dan Moore. I'm a principal product engineer at FusionAuth. And I guess what I'm looking for is senior Java devs who live in Denver, Colorado. We have 3 open recs. So if you know anybody, I don't think it's remote friendly at this time, but yeah, would love to talk to anyone or pass anyone off to the hiring manager. I'm definitely not the hiring manager.
If you would go and add a link maybe in this conversation or on the ARound page, then let's go and I'll take an effort to promote it. Okay, so today, here's you, the new authentication paradigm. Take it away.
All right, here we go. See that nice infinity mirror? Cool, great. All right, thanks so much for having me. I'm going to be talking about basically authentication as it relates to AI agents. And I think it's worthwhile to take a step back and think about where the web was in 2020. Human beings really spent a lot of time interacting with forms, using browsers, or conceivably native apps that leverage APIs. But Really, humans were kind of, the browser was one of the main interfaces, along with other kind of native apps that use APIs. And that's how they interacted with the functionality and services that we wanted. If there was software that was running, workflows or other things that were happening without human intervention, they used those APIs directly. And they all authenticated using some of this kind of alphabet soup. That is, some of it's standardized, some of it's homegrown, but that's how basically humans and pieces of software were identified when they were interacting with services over the web. LLMs changed a whole lot of things, right? They changed a lot of the world, how we learn, how we figure stuff out, but they also changed authentication in the web context. And now we can build agents. Well, what is an agent? An agent is, well, first of all, I would say there's no real industry accepted standard of what an agent is in my mind, or that I've found. A lot of people are groping towards this definition, but in my mind, it's a workflow. So it's something that is aimed towards something, usually by a human being or a business process. But you can sprinkle in LLMs. And what that lets you do is it lets you be more flexible with workflow. And then finally, you also want to sprinkle in API requests or the ability to interact with the outside world, usually over a software application programming interface or API. And that lets the agent take action either against other software systems or in the real world. And I think it's worth noting that an AI agent can be simple. I don't think we often think of it as, or what you read about in the literature, it's something that does, complicated workflow, has all this intelligence, but I think an AI agent can even be something as simple as Dan putting a request into Claude Code saying, hey, look at this code base and, summarize it for me. That to me is an agentic task. But as I kind of mentioned before, the key difference is that it is non-deterministic. It is something that can adapt or take steps that are beyond what the original software developer or programmer put into the workflow, as opposed to what happened about 5 years ago. And to kind of draw a finer point, I think that human beings are non-deterministic and slow. By non-deterministic, I mean they can handle errors, they can handle exceptions, they can handle environment changes, but we operate on the order of seconds to minutes to hours, depending on the decision being made. Software-defined workflows, a la 2020, are deterministic because they have been written by software engineers or built by software engineers, but they're very fast because they operate at the speed of software. Agents occupy this really nice middle ground between human beings and software, where they are non-deterministic, but they operate at the speed of software. So let's dig into some examples real quick. Claude Desktop or ChatGPT are examples, and I love these to start out with because they really point to the fact that a simple, I kind of mentioned earlier, like asking a question of a ChatGPT, to me that really can be an agentic workflow. It's a very simple one, but you are engaging with an AI agent in that scenario. And these are things that are happening outside of engineering organizations. If you all talk to people in your org, I guarantee you that finance, marketing, HR, all these people are probably using these tools. There are also some dev-focused ones like IDEs like Cursor, CLIs like Codex or Claude Code. And then there's the more prototypical, the more science fiction-y one of the semi-autonomous actors. And in this case, you kind of set a high-level goal, and then the agent goes and achieves it. So basically, I'm talking about HAL 9000, right? We're only 24 years late. But a slightly scary example of an agent is something where you say, hey, I want to go to Hawaii. I want you to book my hotel. I want you to find restaurants close to the hotel that are barbecue restaurants because I really miss Hawaiian barbecue. And I want to go do a couple of tourist activities. And this kind of semi-autonomous agent, again, is super sexy. And I think people are working toward this. I have not run across anybody really talking about this. I'm sure there are people doing discovery, maybe some people on this call. I know there are people doing proof of concepts inside organizations, But the idea that you can basically set a high level goal and the agent will go off and achieve it in kind of the real world context is something that is near future, but I don't think is happening right now. So let's talk about what agents can do, because this plays into the authentication that they should perform. They can act on their own behalf. They can act on behalf of a user, right? Like the Maui example I just gave. They can actually act on behalf of users and other agents. So, right, you can have user A tell agent B to do something, and agent B interacts with agent C and agent D. And you need to have some way of tracking and knowing that agent B can do things that agent C can't. So you have this chain of identity that you need to be building up. So let's talk about some common protocols of that and how they handle authentication. So the first protocol is agent to agent. This is a Google protocol. And, you know, I've not seen a ton of people implementing this. It feels slightly more enterprisey, slightly more like SAML than OIDC if you're an identity nerd. It's but they basically are pretty authentication neutral. They basically say, hey, we're gonna like let you use whatever HTTP standards you want, and we recommend things like OAuth 2 or OpenID Connect. We do say, if you're an agent, you need to basically say, hey, how can you authenticate with me? The other common protocol is Model Context Protocol. This is an Anthropic sponsored protocol. There is widespread support. And MCP is interesting because it has this concept of MCP server, and there's 2 deployment models, and each of those deployment models has a different authentication paradigm. So you can have a local deployment, which is basically like a sub-process. So it is something that you're starting up on your local system, even if it is reaching out and making network calls, it's running locally. So it's good for talking to databases or talking to local file system, or if you want to run something local so you have kind of really tight control over it. In that scenario, you're pretty much limited to environment variables. You can pass those through to the MCP server, and that authenticates the agent. And one nice thing is that MCP is set up so that the agent itself doesn't see those environment variables, so you can't leak them, but the MCP server does, and so it can authenticate the agent. If you are talking about a remote MCP server, this is something where you're hosting out on the internet, then you're pretty much in the world of OAuth 2.1. And in this case, you're kind of following those standard grants, either the authorization code grant, which is what you do if a user is interacting and basically that agent is acting on behalf of a user, or the client credentials grant if the agent is not. And I think that the honest truth is that there's been an explosion in MCP servers. I think I looked at the registry and there were over 1,000 of them, and they fit really well with the SaaS business model. So all of these providers actually offer an MCP server that you can plug into an agent, and then the agent can now interact with the SaaS software. There are 2 other things that I want to talk about in terms of authentication that are real, but aren't necessarily protocols. So I think APIs are something that AI agents do a lot of interacting with. That's, again, one of the key differentiators between a workflow and an API agent, or sorry, an AI agent. And with APIs, you can basically either drop in an open API spec, or you can actually have the agent read the documentation of a public API. In this case, you're basically leveraging, for authentication purposes, whatever the API supports, whether that's, you know, the authorization header, or with an API key, or OAuth, or some other solution. Another methodology that is very common, I think, is the browser. And basically, there is an MCP server that basically gives a AI agent access to a headless browser. And so that AI agent can now browse around the web, and it looks, for all intents and purposes, indistinguishable from a user browsing around the web. So it can kind of submit username and passwords. Obviously, authentication there is the same as if a human being was driving it. The issue here is that because it's indistinguishable, if you are a provider of functionality, you have a lot less control over your server because you don't want to lock out normal users. But you can't really tell the difference between, in a deterministic way, you can't tell the difference between an AI agent driving a Chrome browser and a user who's clicking around on Chrome. There are heuristics you can use, but they're not 100% accurate. So we've talked a lot about authentication and kind of the authentication ways that agents can authenticate. Let's talk about authorization. It is unspecified in the protocols I've looked at and in the documentation I've looked at. There's some discussion of scopes, which are kind of high-level coarse-grained authorization that occur in the authorization code grain if you're leveraging OAuth 2. But because authorization, and this is something I've run into again and again in FusionAuth, like authentication is relatively like standardized. Authorization becomes super business logic specific. And so it's no surprise that it's unspecified, but it is really critical. And you need to think about putting up deterministic guardrails around your AI agents, which is yet another reason that you need to make sure that you authenticate them and that they have distinct identities. Because if you don't have deterministic guardrails in non-deterministic system, no points for guessing how many times I'm going to say the word deterministic in this talk. Then you run the risk of some real vulnerabilities. One of these, Simon Willison, is an amazing author in the AI space. Highly recommend you read all his stuff. He identified this lethal trifecta in June of this year. And the idea is, if you have an AI agent, because it can read instructions, because it adapts to the environment that you give it, if you have a situation where you have access to private data, let's say you let it read your email inbox, right? Because you want it to be able to process some emails for you. You also give it the ability to externally communicate, like it can send emails for you, which makes sense to me. If you have an AI agent that you want to process emails, you want it to at least, maybe you have it create drafts, but maybe you have actually send responses to. And it has exposure to untrusted content, like say an email from somebody that is nefarious, then your private data can be sent off to an attacker. And this is the kind of danger that comes with an agent that wasn't really present with a normal kind of software workflow. So what are some solutions? Well, I think that what you need to do is you need to start with where the humans are right now, right? Because the humans are non-deterministic ones. There are differences in speed, but like the non-determinism is the key kind of recipe for prompt injection. And so the principle of least privilege is a great place to start. And I think that you can actually use this in your organizations. If you are saying, hey, my security posture isn't quite what I want to do for the human beings, I can now say, hey, actually, we have this whole agentic identity we need to start to like tighten in, and you can use that to actually improve the security protocols around your human interactions, right? You can say, hey, everybody shouldn't be admin because it's disastrous enough when a human being is admin and they go in and do stuff unknowingly, but it's even worse when they delegate admin privileges to an agent, and then an agent can kind of run rampant and do it much quicker. The other thing, I think I alluded to this earlier, is you don't ever want the agent to be indistinguishable from the end user. That is a recipe for disaster because, again, you can't lock things down. You can't have proper audit trails. You can't rate limit just the agents that are being abusive if you can't tell them from users. Chrome, by the way, says hi. Chrome running from Playwright MCP says hi. Other concerns, these are operational concerns, right, that you need to be thinking about. Auditing, rate limiting, monitoring, all the things that you might feel like an echo of the past, right? It's kind of back to the future because these are all operational concerns that we built up over time in authentication and authorization context for APIs in the 2010s. So there's a lot of work and rediscovering things over again. I promised a decision tree, and here you are. This is something to help you like figure out what kind of authentication solution to look for an agent. You don't need to squint. This is going to be available. I'm going to post it on the event afterwards. But the kind of key takeaway is you want to make sure you know who the actor is and who it's acting on behalf of. You want to make sure you know what protocol is being used, because that limits your authentication options. You want to think about your authorization model and like how you can leverage what human beings, the human authorization model is already there, and like how you can augment it to make it a better solution for things that operate via the software. And you want to make sure the operational concerns I mentioned a couple slides ago have been handled. Here's kind of a high-level actions to take if you're thinking about how agentic AI is interacting in your organization, which I guarantee you it is. And here's my references. And with that, that's all I got from a presentation standpoint. I'm happy to take some questions or have some discussion.
Great timing, by the way. You're pretty good on the numbers. So, you know what, Mr. Phillip, you gave a presentation just a couple of weeks ago about something highly related. Is there question, comment, concern?
My concerns. No, interesting presentation. And I think everything related to agentic AI is going to kick off. And as I alluded a couple of weeks ago, yeah, it's really mandatory to have an identity bound to that agentic AI, because as I expressed, is like the reasoning capabilities of these models are getting immensely good, way better than we imagine possible. And yeah, for me, these models, they are very creative at this moment. So locking down what they're capable of doing is mandatory for sure.
Yeah, I would follow up and just say, like, I think that the answer is the identity is critical, right? Like, and whether that's like certificates or, you know, some other form of non-human identity, for sure. And then, but I don't want people to sleep on the follow-on too, right? Like, you can't just have an identity and let the agent do whatever it wants. Not that anyone's saying that, right? But like, the coarse-grained, or the, how do I put this? When human beings are doing things, you can rely on certain behaviors. And I think that some of those are going out the window with agentic agent or with agents. And I think that we need to start to lock things down more. And it's really hard. Like, I don't know if any of you all have ever done like principle of least privilege in your organizations, but it's really hard because it slows things down. It's sand in the gears, it's friction. And yet we're going to see, I mean, we've already seen organizations have issues with agentic workflows. Like Asana had an issue with their MCP server that it kind of bled over between different tenants. And there were things that happened that where Asana's clients' data was exposed. And I don't think that kind of thing is going to go away. Phillip, I'd love to hear, like, what's your perspective on like the authorization story?
Looking for answers basically because, to be fairly honest, sometimes we simplify agentic and one MCP service or two agents, but at the end, it's getting into a mesh kind of architecture. And like it was one of big news, perhaps a little story about the GitHub MCP service a while back. But basically, it's very hard to say to an agent, now you should be using only read access to, for example, a public repo. And perhaps in the next talk, you must give it right privileges to your private repo. And I've seen nothing into MCP or in agentic frameworks, for that matter, that seem to deal with that. Sometimes ambiguity. Same stands for agents that have access to multiple MCP servers. You should be able to somehow guide or guardrail that they can use X number of MCP servers for certain tasks and others for another task, but not combined, because then you get something like an immensely powerful toolbox.
Yeah.
It's getting smarter than we anticipate, I think, at this moment, and it's not that difficult to find examples of that.
Yeah, my kind of go-to for that would be to compartmentalize, but that like so you have like an agent that you use for the public repo, an agent you use for the private repo, but that again is friction, and people are going to be like, I just want to get my job done, dude. Like, Dan, thank you very much for thinking about security, but I want to like get stuff done. So I'd rather use a super agent that I don't have to worry about like re-authenticating with or handing different scopes to. And so now you're not just fighting against like the agent and the technology, you're fighting against like human like inclination, right? Like, which is an even bigger issue. And we've been working, trying to solve that issue for thousands of years. I don't know if we're gonna crack the nut, but like the ramifications are certainly bigger now.
One of the things you're making me think of is going and trying to figure out who is a human via activity. And when I think about that, I think about tricks that I've used in Selenium, where you just ask the Selenium tool to act as a human as it navigates the interface. And even that, I feel like you can go and suss out who is a Selenium actor and who is a human actor.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if that is one of these things that you started to look for, is just detecting how they navigate. And then has the idea of an agent made that even harder to figure out?
I mean, I don't know if it's made it harder because they're leveraging a lot of the same tools, like when they're like doing the browser stuff. I do know it's a big issue, and I actually was at the IETF meeting last week, and there was like a whole new working group about like WebBot on, like what. So it really kind of, that in some ways collapses to like, how do you recognize Googlebot versus a normal user, right? Or less Googlebot because it provides you a user agent string, but like any other nefarious bot that's crawling your site in a way that you don't want to. And there are people out there that are far more expert in this than I am, but like I think you can look at things like how quick it makes requests. You can look at like JavaScript, user agent fingerprinting. You can look at like, does it execute JavaScript? But that's just a game of cat and mouse for sure, because there's incentives for the agent unless you build the access the agent needs, like via MCP or A2A, then the person driving the agent wants it to like be able to do the thing the person wants to do, and it's going to leverage the tools that are available, including a browser MCP if that's available.
Right. It less acts as a programmatic clicking through websites like Selenium or something that tries to automatically browse. Right now, you have some thinking capabilities behind the clicking. I've tried Playwright to make it send an email through Gmail. It makes intelligent decisions on where to click. It doesn't click everywhere just to get the job done. Then at the end, from an attacking perspective, fingerprinting, from an attacker perspective, you can easily disguise Playwright or Chrome or whatever. We've been doing that for tens of years. So
let me jump on in here. I just want to go and end the LinkedIn stream. Everyone that's joined us in the meeting, please stick around. Everyone that has come here on LinkedIn, very happy to have you here. Please continue to come back. Be in touch if you're interested in getting more involved and joining in the meeting versus the stream. And Dan is going to go and add the takeaway and the other items into the chat for this event. So again, thank you everybody that's out on LinkedIn Live. I'm Josh. I help A-Round startups build customer success systems that scale without adding headcount. So you're seeing a lot of best practices and a lot of different arts here, including marketing, including the use of AI. So be in touch with Dan, Sebastian, Philip, Christine, and I'll go and end the stream. But again, everybody that's here, please stick around and keep talking. In fact, Sebastian, you had raised your hand.
Yep. So I spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff before AI and with AI. And something that an FBI agent told me in the 1980s still holds true. He said, as we were going about a debate about how do you let good guys do stuff and keep the bad guys out. And he just got so frustrated, and he just said, there are no good guys and there are no bad guys. They're just supervised and unsupervised. Like you're just, could you talk about friction and things like that? And, that another way of saying that or tying to that is, again, a very non-technical thing, which is appetite for risk. Okay, so I'm reasonably savvy on the type of discussion we just had, and I didn't follow everything, and I know all of us will learn something new in the next 90 days, and then 90 days after that, and so on. So even if we reached a consensus today, it kind of doesn't matter, okay, in some sense, right? And so what I think is the most important pillar of these discussions is one, literacy that leads to an appetite for risk, and then organizations can find peace with some level of visibility and transparency, knowing what they're going to be able to see, predict, detect, and respond to, and accepting that they can't respond to everything. And that's always been the case. Like, that's not new, right? And so my final sort of cliche or, is, I've seen this with, we all saw this with the internet, with mobile, with HTML, whatever. They say, oh, this changes everything, right? And I just have to say, everything we know, we need to remember. This is not changing everything, right? These core tenets, appetite for risk, visibility and transparency, the importance of monitoring, and then literacy. Like, there is an obligation to continue to educate, and maybe that's getting harder and faster, certainly. But I just think if I was relatively new to this topic, and again, we're off the streaming, I would say very early on in your discussion, particularly the discussion versus your presentation, I would have said I'm lost. Like, I would have just, like, it was too, and that would leave me with a sense of angst, and I just, so I just think that's an important premise, which is there is a risk to using AI. There's a risk to not using AI, and when I say everything, remember, that would include, for example, for enterprises, they made, in theory, one would hope, some serious due diligence and an investment in some sort of ID and authentication infrastructure, whether they're using a Microsoft thing or somebody else, it doesn't matter. Probably they should lean towards figuring out how to extend that versus assessing agentic identity and authentication as a standalone, because throwing out your existing one or having an impedance mismatch between your existing and the new one is going to be, in my opinion, way worse than picking maybe something marginally not as mature, but by the way, though, it does dovetail into all of your existing investments and assets and so on. Anyway, that's my little monologue. But I think it's a super important topic. And at the end of the day, you got to get down into that nitty gritty, like you guys are covering. But I think to avoid panic or undue trust and faith in wizards, these core tenets, we should never lose track of those. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I just respond really quickly, and I mean, I kind of alluded to extending the human identity model,
Sure.
But I think you're totally right. Like, I should put more emphasis on that, because I think that there is some difference in this stuff, as Philip, alluded to, in terms of how smart they can be. But at the end of the day, human beings can be pretty damn smart too. And so I think we can kind of, and you already have all this tooling in this investment, certainly from an enterprise perspective, I would want to extend that. And you see, there's tool chains out there that are doing some of that. Anyway, sorry, Christine.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for the talk. I'm not a technical person. I don't build anything, but from a marketing perspective, I too am using AI components and agents and all these things that you're speaking about. And your talk was at a level I could understand, which is great because you covered a wide scope. So thank you. My point being is that I'm hearing a theme here from the group that we are going back in time. And so is marketing, because what was old is new again. And from a marketing perspective, I'm concerned with agents and ChatGPT and all these search functions for SEO. So what that means is that these agents were trained on certain websites, right? They were trained to go to Reddit. They were trained to go to Forbes, scientific journals. They're still going to these types of components because that's what they were trained on. And they're going to do search, but what that does for young companies, it's hard to compete, right? So as people start using search and gathering information within ChatGPT, within Claude, within these controlled environments that were trained on different models, we're being left out in the cold. And as a marketing person, I'm concerned with how do we keep ahead of all these competitors, all these big competitors. But you guys were touching upon it, which was my takeaway, is that good foundation, basic structure and information on how we treat content is relevant for any type of search. So there's my 2 cents on what it was. So thank you. It was a great, thank you.
I just want a totally different topic than security, but I call that Elmo. I know there's different terms for it, Geo, whatever, large language model optimization. I say Elmo. But there's a whole crop of tools that are coming up. You're probably following those, but if you want, I can point you to some. And actually, in many regards, it's easier for a small company to get recognized by these tools because they're not heavily weighted towards backlinks, and so there's a whole separate thing we could have a talk on.
That'd be great.
But actually, it requires, it actually is not. I think there's a real opportunity. There's some opportunity for monopolistic behavior, certainly, but I don't think it's worse for small companies with these. I would.
Well, you're going against the opinion I'm reading and what I'm experiencing. So
but I would
love to see what you have.
And updating that content, right? Updating that content is a big deal. But it's all anyway. It's off the topic. But with RAG and stuff like that, it's actually easier for companies to get their content recognized by these engines than with SEO. In fact, but that's a separate discussion. Sorry.
Well, when I'm saying SEO is that's a generic term for all search.
Yeah.
Thank you. That'd be great.
Yeah, I would watch that talk. Just to Josh, take notes. Just as an anecdote, we track where people get our software from, and it's self-reported, right? So it's definitely bumpy. But since we started breaking out ChatGPT or LLMs as how did you hear about us, which we started doing earlier this year, like in spring of this year, it's top 3 every time. So people are 100%, and we're a software company. We sell software tools, so it's a certain population. But wouldn't surprise me if that was a leading indicator of like how people are gonna find stuff nowadays, or at least shortly. So.
Okay. Hey, maybe this is a good time to call quits. So, everybody, thank you for being here. I sincerely appreciate each of you for being here. It's a nascent group, but what I'm interested in is having this solid foundation of experts to participate, especially as we start to move over to the next type of content. And if you have suggestions for people who might be into the solve session, Dan, so you know, the solve session is the idea of a company just coming out into LinkedIn Live, for these sessions, which will be streamed on LinkedIn Live, with one business problem. And then we'll take 5 minutes to ask questions and spend the rest of the time suggesting answers from different points of view. It could be marketing, it could be architecture, it could be customer success, sales, whatever it might be. It could be another startup that's like, hey, wait a minute, we can collaborate on this. And that's a chance for that company to gain exposure, while at the same time for people that are looking to assist that company in a contract full part-time basis to begin the relationship. So everybody, if you know of any companies that might be willing to come on and begin this format, send them my way.
Sounds great. Cool.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for the presentation.
Thanks.
Yes,